Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast. I'm Matt.
I'm Luca.
And I'm Will.
For the audio listeners, Willis will get a fat ciggy. We all, the three of us here, use he, him pronouns. And today we are wrapping up our series on character classes from D&D and their application or influence or inspiration from larger fantasy worlds and sci-fi as genres. And we are ending this series with a ginormous episode on mages, arcane powered, sometimes not, spell casting beings who, do wild things. We'll get into all the differences between artificers, sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards. I already see some head shakes, so this is going to get interesting. Before we begin, though, today also we're going to be skipping our regular scheduled segments and getting straight into it, so we don't, end up going 3 hours. But first, I want to give a shout out to Luca's mom, who I've just learned is what would you call that? Like a mason?
Pottery.
A
mason.
potter.
A mason.
I
Just a
don't know,
stone
dude.
mason.
Yeah, like a seamstress. They have titles.
Yeah, she makes pots, kind of like all these mugs that I've been using.
Put your hand up behind it. Yeah, there we go.
every episode.
Nice.
There we go.
Yeah, you can follow her. Her name is Masha, right?
Yes, that is her
So
name.
you follow her on Instagram,
Yep.
Masha Dobb. So it's MASADOB
Yep.
on Instagram. And you can maybe, if you find Luca on the page, comment down below and tell us where. But
buy
without any
her-
further ado, sorry, what's that?
You can buy her things in Stony Plain if you live in Edmonton.
Oh, awesome. Right
So
on.
I'm plugging my mom's Instagram before ever plugging my own.
Nice. We'll have to do a collab with your mom and get some
Yeah.
special Lords
Lords of Lore
mugs. That'd be sweet. Okay. I think that's all right. When we're done this series, so by the time you're all seeing this next week, we have a huge episode, our first episode of Lords of Lore Adventures. Ooh. We're going to be playing a live game, live to tape game of D&D ran by a friend of the show, Cam Chapman. They'll be running, we ran into some scheduling errors with Malachi, also friend of the show. So you'll see Malachi at some point, but Cam Chapman, also a great DM, game master extraordinaire. So I'm very excited. And I think we all know I'm playing a paladin. Luca's going to be playing a druid, and Will a bard. So, and I guess we could say now we're all writing each other's backstories. I'll write Luca's, Luca will write Will's, and Will I. So yeah, some hilarity will ensue, I'm sure. But yeah, so stay tuned for that. That's going to be very exciting. Probably a longer episode there too. So 2 long episodes for you coming shortly. Without any further ado, we'll jump straight into Will's wondrous wisdom and begin our main topic on mages and spellcasters. Go ahead.
Magic. The unknown. Explained. I mean, so usually we always kind of talk about how can we use these roles. I guess when we've been talking about classes, like how can we use them in fantasy? And I think that we could just kind of like combine that discussion with this wondrous wisdom, because I mean, man, like again, magic is like so broad. But I mean, it's used in fantasy as it's been like depicted in the real world, and that's how do we explain the unexplained, right? I mean, like magic, I'm sure we all know that I'm definitely like the sword and shield, absolute Chad, Giga monster. But like magic is like one of the reasons why I really love fantasy. And that's just because like possibilities are endless. I mean, even if you do have a closed magic system, or a more restrictive one, it's still, you can make that system to be whatever you want. I think magic is the ultimate backbone of fantasy, just in general, like regardless of classes or anything, just because it's kind of one of one of the like the defining things about fantasy, right? Um,
Yeah,
I
without
don't.
magic, the fantasy is just a period piece.
Yeah, exactly,
Historical
exactly.
fiction.
Just Game of Thrones, the movie, or the film, the TV show, I should say.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, magic has been always been described like in cultures to explain the unexplained. For example, like magic has played a major role in, for example, European history in the Middle Ages slash Renaissance. I mean, even up until the Enlightenment, where we saw like witch burnings
Right.
or witch hunts in general, I should say, not always just burnings, but other forms of horrendous executions. Um, definitely definitely like the darker effects of magic. I mean, even up until like when Dungeons and Dragons was released in the 70s, where it was often condemned for being some form of satanic black magic ritual stuff of people just, I don't know, trying to kill mind flayers and stuff, but apparently those were devils. But I mean, yeah, I mean, magic gives us the freedom when writing fantasy, and I guess creating our own fantasy and our own D&D campaigns and video games and stuff like that. It gives us the freedom to basically do whatever we want, right? But I mean, I like D&D's take on magic because it definitely gives us these kind of routes that pushes us into like these certain categories to like kind of give it a little more organization for players. I know like I've only DM'd like once and it went horribly, but not because of me, of course. I'm not like you other DMs, but I mean, like I think D&D, like I mean, I'm definitely not as like in depth with my knowledge of D&D compared to you guys, but I like the classes just because it adds that structure, especially for like newer players. I think. Again, that's just a personal take, which are my personal takes are usually pretty good. Especially my Disney ones.
Yes. As we know.
I mean, yeah, like one of the things I've like, I'm gonna take a massive pot shot against, I guess, just like Western culture in general, and especially like academics and stuff like that, because I mean, like growing up in a Western culture, definitely like that whole like objectivity is kind of like the basis of how we often understand things. Like we always have to have some form of empirical evidence when you make a claim or have some way to measure something, right? And I think that kind of just like ruins a lot of fun and a lot of stuff. Whereas like magic is just like, yeah, we don't understand lightning, but like fuck it, like it would be cool if somebody could throw a lightning bolt, right? It'd be cool if someone summoned a lightning bolt that just like absolutely destroyed something because they could, as opposed to it just happening because of temperature and air pressure changes, right?
It's sort of like being a kid. You just like make things up because they seem cool. Yeah.
And like I wouldn't even say it's just that, but I mean it could also be, I mean, like what we would call as Westerners magic might be like just a way of understanding, like I guess like another culture or something like that, like the way they understand and view the world.
Right.
I can't remember the actual term, but I took a seminar class during my undergrad where we kind of went through this, where it's like, and like the topic of magic was actually brought up, and like I think it was like called like ontology or something like that. I can't remember the real name for it, but it was kind of like, yeah, exactly like what we would call magic or whatever. It was like just like kind of like a basic fact of life for like another group of people, which I thought was like kind of cool. Right. So like for example, like we might think that as a druid, the ability of talking to animals is just like restricted to like fantasy or whatever in our D&D campaigns and video games. But I think like it's kind of cool, the idea of like just like the idea of like talking to animals or whatever is just like a fact of life for another group of people.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a massive fuck objectivity kind of guy. Just because I think it does ruin the fun.
See, I'm very much not that way. I do approach things like very logically, which might sound weird for listeners of this podcast. But that's why I love fantasy as escapism, because like I can put away like my anxiety and be like, don't do this because this will be the result, and that's bad. Like I can put that away and be like, I fucking throw a fireball at the card. Let's see what happens. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. See, I'm also been like super weird because I've been like reading a lot of like Farley Mowat, a Canadian author, pretty good. I recommend him. But one of his taglines is "I tell the truth, not facts."
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, like in today's day and age, that might be kind of questionable, like, fake news kind of thing. But at the same time, like it's kind of like I'm very much like an optimist, and like I kind of like that approach of why can't magic be real?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, like what we call science in today's world, you know, like in the Enlightenment era, it was like, holy fuck, we can turn on a light bulb. Like that's magical. Whereas like today, it's just like I turn on the light bulb in my fridge at like 4:30 in the morning, like when I'm like naked trying to eat like popsicles and shit.
Yeah, no. There's actually a quote, and I think it's Thor. I think it's the first Thor, where maybe it's the second Thor. Somebody goes to Asgard, and they're like, "How are you doing this?" And they're like, "Yeah, what you call magic, we describe as science," or it's like the inverse of that quote. But it's just like, yeah, we can do incredible things through the power of knowledge, which I think relates pretty closely or more closely to the other spellcasting classes, more so the wizards, being like, magic isn't so much a mysterious force that we have no control over. It's something like anything else in the world. If you study it enough, you can control it, type of thing.
Yeah. Which is like, I mean, like you definitely have like, for example, like that comes to mind as like Harry Potter kind of thing. But I also like magic is just so wide and expansive, and I like that you could do whatever you want. Like for example, with like Tolkien's Middle Earth, just like magic is just like basically how the world was created. But again, like that's like an allegory to like how like our universe is understood to have been created, right? One might consider massive explosion, you know. Maybe that was a major through a fireball and just created our universe. That'd be sick, hey?
God is just a wizard.
Big facts.
Holy, that'd be funny.
Enjoy this mushroom trip with Will and magic. I mean, like I said, there's definitely been like the darker side of like how we understand magic in the real world. Again, witch burnings and I guess just like unnecessary, like I guess like exorcisms, which we're starting to learn in today's world, where it's like not exactly a possession like a warlock, but that person was just suffering from some sort of mental illness.
I often, when you watch or listen to or read up on historical times or watch like a period piece or something, and you're like, or I actually recently went to like this Van Gogh exhibit, and he was like dealing with depression, and I think they said like maybe bipolar as well, and just like even then, it's not even that long ago, like a few hundred years. It's like, man, even then they just had no idea. So they're just like, no, I don't know why a guy's so sad, you know, like just no fucking idea. Like and they thought he was like deranged, but it's like, oh, this guy's just depressed, you know. He's like one of like I think 14 children or something. So it's like, yeah, that might, you know, in the time he was raised too, like certainly a lot to be, you know, traumatized with or upset about. So I mean,
like it's kind of like magic being used as like a scapegoat to just like basically just categorize people, which
like someone's having sleep paralysis and like, oh, they're channeling the demon, but you know,
let's go beat the shit out of them with a leather belt or something.
Exactly.
They repent.
And it really just makes me sad to think about it in hindsight. It'd be like how many innocent people were just accused of like witchcraft because like, I don't know, one day they mixed two things together and it created a foamy fucking, you know, chemical reaction.
Yeah.
It's like, she's a witch. No, she's a goddamn scientist, you know?
Or just for like no reason. Just be like, this guy's a mage. Like, let's get him. It's because you don't really like him. Anyway, history is a lot of fun.
If you want to get into, I guess, just like the topic of like witch hunts, I mean, we often think of like the whole, like, like the crucible in like North America, right? I saw Marianne with the devil, that type of stuff. But if you want to like, if you have like, I guess that dark twisted desire to learn more about the evils of magic and the history, I would suggest looking into like the witch hunt, like in Scotland. I think I was 1600s or some shit, but it was like pretty brutal because it was like one of the more like systemic setups, I guess, if you will, for witch hunts in Europe, especially. I think it was like over like 500 women were like systematically like killed.
Wow.
Stuff like that. And again, like definitely like when we think of witch hunts, we think of like Salem, Massachusetts and stuff like that. And I mean that just like persecution, I think, and like magic kind of go hand in hand for back in the day. But I'm trying to be an optimist.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with this anymore. I went off topic.
That's okay.
That's super depressing.
I think that's a good basis of how magic worked its way into fantasy, especially fantasies always, or more often than not, set in that European, medieval setting. So it makes sense that we draw influence from that, but also all different cultures across the world. There's always, even if it's just like creation myths or explaining or a lack of knowledge of scientific things and explaining them as magic, that all sort of weaves its way. And then there's also just like, wives' tales. Don't go there because there's an evil witch, and it's like, no, it's just bears, but you still shouldn't go there.
I know, like it's kind of cool how magic is so like, I guess, like pervasive throughout human cultures everywhere, and like we still kind of, I guess, it's kind of cool like how we talk about magic, maybe not as much in today's world, and like how we understand the world and stuff like that. But I mean, it's kind of cool that we still talk about it in, like, at least in fantasy, the way that we as humans would have done, like, 6,000 to 10,000 years ago more. So, and again, that's what's always drawn me to fantasy. Like how you said, it's just like without magic, it's a period piece. And like I think the magic class is like one of the most important parts of a fantasy component. So
yeah.
So that's how you can use it in your fantasy.
Nice. Yeah, I think a really cool thing. Like, so this isn't an episode on magic systems. We've done that unreleased, and I think maybe one day we'll tackle it again or release that episode or something, because these are obviously intertwined a lot. Spell casting channels, I guess you could call them, and the spellcasters who use those channels, but not entirely the same thing, especially when we're talking about D&D, which I guess we can start getting into now. A lot of the spells you'll see on different spell lists that player classes have access to are the same spells. Some of them are, limited to a certain class or subclass even, but it's all sort of the same effect in some cases. But it's how you gain the ability to do that and how often you can do it based off your abilities is sort of what defines the difference between spellcasters here. So I guess we'll start with wizard because it's the oldest and most basic. Luca, because you are a resident wizard loyalist, we'll have you start. How would you define a D&D wizard? Give us like the kindergarten explanation for those who are not as familiar with D&D. And then your interpretation of what that means to you.
Essentially, wizard is the student of magic in like the shortest term. Essentially, somebody who is learning from nothing and then slowly gaining through their intelligence, which is the stat you use to cast magic in D&D as a wizard. You gain knowledge and you slowly build a spell book, essentially, through your understanding of spells. I like the wizard the most of the three main spellcasting classes in D&D because they have the most broad range of spells they can cast, other than healing spells, which I never understood, but whatever. Like,
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
yeah, like wizards can't cast healing spells at all, which just to me makes zero sense. But yeah, they're essentially the nerd, like the studious, the scholar of the arcane is literally what it says in D&D Beyond.
Mhm.
So yeah, they gain knowledge and slowly build spells. That's why wizards tend to be old people with long beards, or if they're female, without beards. Like they're just
Maybe.
takes a long time to like gain that knowledge and build up that spell book.
Yeah, wizard is very much the scientist of the
Yes.
D&D world.
Yeah, the scientist of fantasy, the one that's like, how do you cast a spell? What are the integral parts of it? How do you replicate it? Like they can literally break down a spell over the course of whatever how long your DM says it takes to learn a spell. Like that's why they learn new things. They don't just like they get like epiphanies through knowledge, not through like spontaneous
Right.
levels up or like XP gains. So wizards are the coolest and best magic caster in D&D. But like I think it's important to remember that D&D is like an actual role-playing game. So having that structure is essential. Whereas like in broader fantasy, I can think of very few pure wizards, like in the D&D definition, in like stories that I've read. I literally like I don't know if I can think of a single one, honestly, that just like the D&D type slowly gaining knowledge through like, because like you can like say like Harry Potter's not a wizard. Harry Potter is a sorcerer. Like, you know,
What about
Dumbledore also sort of like they're all the wizards in the Harry Potter universe gain their magic through like being born a wizard, like innately having that power, not through slowly learning the spells.
Yeah.
Like they all start as sorcerers. They're like born as wizards.
Damn.
Yeah.
So,
we'll get into that because yes, but also no, because we'll get into it.
yeah, we'll get it. But it's like, what do you consider bloodline? Like, is that a sorcerer or a wizard? Because wizards, like, it's very clear that it's like you are a non-magic caster that learns spells. That's how you begin as a wizard. It's like there's an event where you encounter magic for the first time, and then you begin to learn the craft, like a real world magician. You know, like you see a sleight of hand trick, and like, how'd you do that? Then they're like, I'm not telling you. So you spend the rest of your life trying to learn it. Like,
right. Okay. Yeah. I also see it though, like the Jedi, like the Force say, right? Like not everybody who's born with the Force can become a Jedi or does, or maybe they all could, I guess, but not everyone does.
midichlorians.
Yeah. So even
No,
if your
wizards.
count is high, you know, you might not be able to do it. And even if like you had no training at all to become a Jedi, you wouldn't be a good one. You know what I mean? You'd need some sort of training because there's, you know, generations of people who have mastered the control over this power, right? And that's how I see wizards as well. Like, you know,
Yeah,
there's
that's
other
what I'm
people
saying,
who
like,
understand. Yeah.
In the broader like media of fantasy and sci-fi, wherever there's magic, it's never like this clear cut.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's honestly tough. Because like there's famous examples of like the wizard, and in my opinion, they don't fall into that category.
Yeah.
They fall into something else. So we'll move into sorcerer now, I guess. That's what I'm referencing. And sorcerer in D&D terms is someone who is innately born with that magical power, whether that be through blood infusions from a dragon. Their parents were killed in dragon fire, which gave them that power. They were touched by a god at some point in their life. It gave them the power. They stumbled across some ancient artifact that gave them power, something. But it's very much like those stories when you hear like the power was in you the whole time. You know what I mean? Or I've always had this power since birth and I've never known what to do with it. That's very much the sorcerer. And their casting ability, opposed to the wizard's intelligence, learning things, is willpower. They will themselves to learn things, not even learn, just to do things. And because of that, they can do things sometimes much faster than a wizard, sometimes much bigger, more powerful than a wizard, who is focused on, I need to replicate the exact conditions so that I can cast a spell. Like a wizard always knows how big their fireball is going to be. They know it's going to be, I think it's 20 by 20. It's going to be a sphere, and they can cast it 120 feet away from them. Now, whether they can tell what's 120 feet or what 20 feet is a different story. But they always know that that's going to be the result when they cast the spell and say the words and perform, supply the components. But a sorcerer is like, fuck, enemies, fire. And the way it works in D&D with some sorceress origins is that sometimes if you panic, shit goes bad. You don't have control over your power. You roll a 1, and now you got to roll on the wild magic table, and you meant to cast a fireball, but now your friends all turn into lizards. Like, shit is, because you don't know how to use your power yet. You didn't study. And so I love the dynamic of a wizard and a sorcerer butting heads, being like, oh, you're so irresponsible. You don't even know what you're doing. The other guy's like, yeah, dude, you're slow. You can't even, I can cast a fireball in like 3 seconds. It takes you a whole 6, Yeah, I love sorcerers. And I think most of the wizards we know from fantasy actually fall more in line to this because their knowledge is restricted. Like the average person in those fantasy universes could not learn to do what they do. It's just totally circumstantial. Whereas wizard in the D&D light is, yeah, you could be anybody as long as someone took you in and trained you how to do this, or you learned yourself, you can figure this out. Yeah. So I think that's the difference. We'll get into some examples later. But actually maybe let's start to get into them now. So we'll do wizard and sorcerer now. And we'll actually start with you, Will. Do you have any examples of wizards?
Before we get into examples, this is gonna sound like super goofy, but like I always pictured just like the difference between a sorcerer and a wizard is just like sorcerers just like wave their arms and just fucking whereas like definitely wizards are like very much like technical, hold wand waving and book reading, but like just like sorcerers just like fuck it, like let's go unleash the floodgate of just like shit. But
I think that comes from video games, because when you're fighting an enemy that's a sorcerer, like they never have a staff. They're just like pyromancer,
Yeah, because like for example, like again, best D&D equivalent video game I can think of is Divinity: Original Sin 2, where like that's what they have sorcerers, and it's just like one in particular, like Lois is one of my favorite characters. Like, yeah, that's what she does. Just basically just like fuck it, just like wipe out the entire TV screen. Yeah, and like thanks for playing, boys.
And I think that I don't think that's wrong, because I think that works into like the origin of power, right? For a sorcerer, you are your power. But I feel like a wizard, you're pulling on the fabric of the world, depending on the magic system. You're pulling on the fabric of the world and influencing it in a way, just the way we would like with turning on the light bulb.
Yeah.
But you're the engineer who's, putting together the circuit, and you do that through these, phrases and rituals and hand motions, and having the right components. Where the wizard's just like, it's like the clapper, basically. I don't know how this shit works, but when I clap my hands, the light goes on. Yeah, just keep doing that. One time I clapped really loud and the sun went off for a minute. It was fucking scary, But hey, I do what I do.
I guess for like a wizard example, I think maybe just magic in general in Elder Scrolls. And the reason why I would say is because, I mean, if you like, I don't like really want to go into that because it's just a wormhole for now, but maybe unabashed maybe, but like magic, like when you look at the stars, like if you're like on like the plane of Mundus on the planet of like Elder Scrolls, yeah, and you just like look up into the night sky and like you see stars and shit, mostly specifically with stars, those are like literally holes like in the fabric of the plane of existence that you belong on, and like it's just basically just magic and shit leaking into your dimension.
Nice.
And so like I think like just magic users in general in Elder Scrolls might fall under wizard, because it's just like magic is there. It's just like through years of studying, you just become good with it, right? Definitely, there are like natural users, Mana Marco, but I mean, like definitely like player characters aside, because it's just like you just learn magic and just fucking destroy everything. But like,
yeah, but I think like it's a game, right? So it's
Yeah.
not like they're gonna fucking. You have to spend 5 hours learning how to cast. You're like,
Studying.
fuck, dude, no one would ever play fucking mage. So,
exactly.
but they go through the effort of like, you have to read this book. That's the
Imagine,
only
like-
way you can learn flames. You know?
Like imagine just like coming home after work or whatever, and then just like sitting. You want to like pick up the controller, and it's just like you just like go to school. To learn
Yeah.
magic.
There is still like a Harry Potter game that's like that. Not obviously you don't like study, but like the spells are specific, like motions on the control, like a
Mhm.
combo in like a Street Fighter or whatever, like a
Yeah.
finisher move, and that's the only way you could use that spell. So I think that's a cool like game mechanic to like force like, yeah, you actually have to learn this type of thing.
Yeah, just as a quick side note for game mechanics, Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is just basically just like peasant simulator. Like you actually have to spend like at least like 10 to 15 hours like real world like learning, like making sure that your character learns how to read. Because if you don't, when you just like pick up a piece of paper or parchment, it's just like like when you like if your like reading skills are like 0, it's just like scribbles.
Oh my god. That's
Like
so
I got like
good.
2 hours into it. I was like, man, like fuck this game.
It's too much.
I don't want to learn how to read. I can't even read in real life. Yeah, no, I kind of like that, but I guess like sorcerers would just like how you said. I guess it's just most magic characters that I like that I would be able to come up with specifically from video games would be sorcerer classes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, let's hear some of your examples then, Luca, of wizards.
lay it on me.
Of wizards, honestly, I don't know. Like, there's one from. I mean, not even a good example. There's Carla Athmaza from the Goblin Emperor.
That was the name I was struggling to find last episode.
Oh, the Athmazari.
Yeah, the asthmatics.
Like I wanted to talk about it just because like there's so many cool titles and names in the Goblin Emperor, and they're just like not even explored at all. Like the Athmazari is like their magical society or like college of mages or whatever. Like you don't even know what it is. It's just like the group of magic casters, and only one spell is cast in the entire book.
Wow.
Like the entire story. So I think that they're wizards. Like they have to like go through the Athmazari and like rise up in the ranks to become an Athmaza, which is like the title they earn. Then they're allowed to serve the emperor. So he would be an example of an actual, and he even looks like he's described as like a scholarly looking guy. He's like tall, he has glasses and like a long nose, and always carrying his books around. He's all like disheveled all the time. So he's described sort of as a wizard. But another wizard, there is like not the pure like D&D type wizard though. Like even Gandalf, for example.
Yeah,
Gandalf,
total sorcerer.
not a wizard. Like,
Even I would even say maybe even a warlock.
possibly, yeah.
I have a case for Gandalf being a warlock. So, but continue.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm with you. But okay, so I struggled to find them too, because it's such and I love D&D wizards because I think that study. But so there is an example. I can't remember the name of the organization, but from the Echoes series by Philip C. Quintrell, the first book, Rise of the Ranger, there is like an organization of wizards, and they study at a school a la Hogwarts type of thing. Even the what are the witches called from The Witcher?
Sorceresses? They're just
Yeah,
that school that they go
the
to.
lodge.
Uh,
I can't think of the name. It starts with a C, but
yeah.
the lodge is like the organization post.
Yeah,
school.
and they serve as like court wizards basically for the nobles throughout the land type of thing.
It's like an Illuminati type thing guiding
Yeah.
us.
So, but they're born with like they have to recognize power within them from beforehand. But in this universe, it's sort of just like you go there to learn type of thing. The other example I could find that came to mind was in Full Metal Alchemist. I guess that magic system is something you need to know, and if you don't replicate the conditions of that specific spell or whatever equivalent exchange, it doesn't work. And sometimes can have wild magic sorcery a bit like repercussions to things if you mess them up. Yeah. So I also put I was talking about Onward last episode. Ian and Barley, like again, Onward is just a love letter to D&D. So the magic system in that movie is definitely just a wizard. You have to recite the spell, have the staff, have the crystal. And I think they only use like 3 or 4 spells. There's like enlarge, reduce, walk on, like airwalk or whatever that spell's called. And then I can't even remember the last one, but it's a really cool use. And like the way they utilize those was like, it's like, oh man, fucking, this is why I love D&D, just the way you can use magic. Yeah, and then there's obviously examples from the D&D larger universe, like Elminster, who's like the Gandalf-esque wizard. But yeah, it was like bone dry, to be honest. Like, and I think that's a little bit unfortunate. Like, I think that and I think like there's obviously examples from like novels where it's like, yeah, you have to learn how to use this properly. But in a lot of cases, it's more like a sorcerer because it's like, you were born with the power. Now this organization is going to show you how to use it properly, but it's never like, you don't know anything. Here's a book. It's like, oh, sweet, fire. Like, that's very rare, I think, because a lot of books, the protagonist is always like the chosen one, like the hero's journey type of thing. There has to be something special about. And I love the wizard in D&D because it's like, there's not. This guy's just a dweeb. He's just a nerd who is motivated enough to teach himself how to use this stuff. Yeah.
Before we jump into Warlocks,
well, let's get some sorcerer examples too. But yeah, for sure.
Go.
We'll start with you then, Will, Mr. Eager Beaver. Do you have any examples of sorcerers? Because I honestly feel like sorcerers the most plentiful from all of fantasy and sci-fi.
Yes, but one quick example of wizard that I think we're overlooking, and I just thought of on the spot, is a very good example of a D&D wizard is the actual player character, because you have to sit down, learn the magic systems of the game, as well as if you're going to use, like, for example, like 5th edition, which is the only edition that I know. I mean, you have to learn what a spell slot is. What?
Yeah.
Just beat it to death with a hammer. But so like I think it'd be kind of cool to have like a fantasy setting and then you just like play yourself as the wizard.
I totally agree. That's actually a really good point. That's so meta. But like, you say I cast this and the DM goes, what does that do? And then you have to say, well, if I'm 120 feet away, like you're literally like reciting the spell. You roll the dice,
fireball,
that's the somatic component, and you got to have the dice. That's the materials. So that's a really astute observation.
But I guess
we were the wizards all along.
I'm the greatest wizard in the world, is what you're saying.
Like,
exactly.
We should have like a campaign where it's just like we all play like high fantasy stuff, and then just like Lucas just plays himself as the wizard.
I've had this idea for so long. My idea is like it's a one shot, and it's before everyone comes, I make them do a what would your stats be if you were a D&D character type of Facebook fucking quiz, and then you fill it out, and then it gives you the stats. I'm like, okay, those are your stats. You're you, and now we're in D&D. So everything There's no worry about metagaming. Like everything's fair game, and the things you have in the D&D universe are the things you came to the table with. So if you didn't bring a sword, which I mean, I hope you don't bring a sword, yeah,
We're
then
all
you
playing
don't have
monks.
one. Yeah. And if you have no gold coins either, so you'd
I
have
mean, I
to
always
like.
have an axe in the car, so I'll be
Fair
a
enough.
barbarian.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I've always wanted to do that type of one shot. But I think you'd have to have like super invested D&D players who are like, what? Could you imagine like first time players? You're like, it'd be so like fucking off putting. Anyways, let's get to some sorcerer examples. We'll go with you first, Will.
Merlin.
Yep.
I think
Also
that's
on my
just.
list.
I mean, like I've heard there is like a case that he falls under the wizard class due to some interpretations, but I mean, like chiefly, we're talking Merlin, like Arthurian. It's sorcerer. I mean,
Yeah.
majority of interpretations of background origin stories is chosen one type dude,
Yeah.
which is better at magic than everyone else, and yeah, I mean, learns how to control it obviously, so he doesn't like annihilate all of Camelot by accident. But yeah, no, I'd say sorcerer.
Yeah. So Merlin's like that's where like the wise old wizard trope comes from for a lot of fantasy. But I love, like, I would definitely say he's a sorcerer as well. But I love that, like, go to Merlin, he'll know, and he's like, fuck, I think I read about this like a couple centuries ago. I think there's a spell for this. He's got to like pull out a dusty book and like,
Imagine
hey,
fires up
this one right here.
Wikipedia.
Yeah. I love like that aspect of like a sorcerer who like had to force himself to learn. He's like, I don't want to read. This is boring.
Or they just like wrote stuff down and just like forgot about it.
Yeah. Do like the wrong spell. That's a thing too. Yeah. Continue.
That's it.
Oh wow. Terrible
Merlin.
list. What about you, Luca?
The most generic thing.
There's a lot of sorcerers on my list. Actually, most of my list is sorcerers. But like, here's the thing. Depending on the magic, so like D&D is kind of unfair because it has so many different magic systems intertwined. Like wizards have their magic system, sorcerers have theirs, like everybody has their own magic system. There's not just one unifying system and everybody like living in that system, like bending magic in different ways. Like monks are mages. If you really like, if we're gonna like, let's not play these games, monks, rangers, clerics, paladins, they're all mages. Like they're all the same.
Yeah, I think, but my interpretation is the sorcerer and the wizard are the same magic system. They just access it differently.
Oh, like your interpretation of sorcerers access arcane power as well.
Yeah, it's definitely arcane, and it's.
But then what about clerics? What do clerics access?
Divine.
And then what do the gods access? Like, do gods all? Like that's, you see what I mean?
Do gods pull on the same weave as wizards? Tough to say. Like maybe, and like maybe they have a different view of it that lets them see into different streams of the arcane, so they can do healing spells. Whereas a wizard's like limited.
I've always read it as like arcane power is the highest level of power in the D&D magic systems.
That's interesting.
Just because I mean I'm a wizard myself, so
IRL.
But let's get into some examples of, and also a lot of characters are like a mix of wizard and sorcerer. It's like you can be born with the innate power to control magic, but you can't use it until you learn it. Like
I like
you can like you can have magic, but you can't even like accidentally cast a spell because you have no idea what you're doing, or the magic in you is so weak.
Yeah, it would be like such a coincidence for you to actually say the right words and do the things at the same time. There's no way, but you do have a lot of stories. Like
a lot of stories, it's really ambiguous. Like for example, wizards, you need like there's somatic components, there's physical components, like all this stuff. It's very clear. Whereas a lot of stories, they don't really go into like the actual how it feels casting a spell. But anyway, here are some of my examples. So the Sword of Kaigen to begin with, which you're reading, Matt, they're all sorcerers.
Yeah.
My two favorite being Misaki Matsuda and Takashi Matsuda.
Oh, okay, cool.
Takashi or Takeru actually, right? He is
the uncle or the dad?
The father.
Yeah, I think it's Takashi.
Uncle father.
Yes. It is Takashi. Then Geralt of Rivia is technically a sorcerer.
Yep.
Even though he's like an artificial sorcerer.
But see, that's still a bloodline.
It still counts, yeah. So in
The
that same
hand
vein,
signs.
Harry Potter is a sorcerer.
I agree.
Bloodline. And now I have a couple Mark Lawrence examples because I love Mark Lawrence. From the Book of the Ancestor, Nona Grey, their magic system relies on bloodlines. Sister Path, who is like one of my favorite all-time magic users in anything ever, just because of the end, like the very end of her story is like one of the biggest boss moves I've ever seen anywhere, hands down in all fantasy writing. Like just so cool. Jorg Ancrath, who I've mentioned a couple times, he's super cool because he's a sorcerer that gains and loses a few different abilities in his trilogy. And then
that's such a cool concept. Like,
yeah,
if a sorcerer's power is their blood,
mm-hmm.
what happens when your arm gets chopped off? Like, do you lose the ability to like is your magic nerfed because now you have less of it? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, his concept is a bit different. Like, he's not born with magic,
right?
He gains and then loses it a couple times throughout the story. There's Jalin Kendith and Snorriver Snuggerson, who gain magic at the very same time. Bat? No, he's a Viking. He's a Viking from Norway, or what used to be Norway. Then obviously from Malazan, there is Quick Ben, who is like the first mage you encounter, and he is like pure sorcerer. And I won't dive into how he gets more power than he should have. And he gains it in a very sorcerer-esque way. There is Anomander Rake, who is like a godlike creature, and he is definitely a sorcerer, pure bloodline. He can turn into a dragon because he has draconic blood. Like, that's a sorcerer through and through.
Yeah, 100%.
And then Beak, he is also a minor character from one book in Malazan, and he might be my favorite Malazan character ever. I can't dive into anything. Can't spoil anything, but he's just probably the most powerful mage in Malazan aside from the gods.
Wow. Okay, so it's interesting you say that there, but then in D&D you think Arcane is the highest,
right? But I'm talking about D&D, like like in the D&D. Yeah, but in the Malazan universe, it's very ambiguous what magic is. It's like you draw power from different worlds, so like that's almost Warlock-esque in the way you like gain power. From Brando Sando, all of Brandon Sanderson.
Thanks.
Kaladin Stormblessed, who is the main character of, or one of the three main characters of the Stormlight Archive. So he gains his power, but this is not a spoiler at all. He gains his power by bonding a Spren, and Spren are essentially tiny creatures that are personifications of everything in the world. So there's like wind spren, fire spren, emotion spren, like anger spren, everything.
This is like one of my examples.
It's super cool. So he binds a spren, and I won't say what kind of spren because the specific type of spren they bond is very important to the magic they get. And in the Stormlight Archives, there is like 10 orders of the Knights Radiant, and they all each bond different spren. There is Shallan, who is also one of the three main characters of the Stormlight Archive. She uses she's a light weaver, so her magic is all like illusion based, and she was like a unsurpassed artist before she bonded a spren, and now that she can like weave light, she can create like perfect disguises for herself, and it's super cool because all of her spren is very based on lies and deceit. And so he likes it when she lies and like uses her magic to trick and deceive people.
So that almost sounds more like a warlock.
Almost, yeah. Like it's very subtle, like the difference between, because there's also like wizard-esque elements where they need to like learn their power and they need to say specific words to gain more power, and they're essentially swearing oaths in order to gain access to more power, but they're drawing their power from the spren or from Stormlight, which is like the high storms that happen in the world, like the constant storms, and like the lightning out of them is like the energy they use. Another great example from Brando Sando is Susebron from the I talked about Warbreaker a couple times. It's like the one where I talked about with like the talking sword, Nightblood. So Susebron is like he is the God King. He is like the most powerful magic user in that world. He's just like he's a pure sorcerer. Like they're born with power. They use breaths. Like there's essentially, but then again, there's still wizard elements where they need to say specific words to use their magic. Avatar Aang.
Yeah, I was gonna say all air. Well, actually, you know what? I disagree.
Okay, let's dive into that just a bit because we talked about Aang as a monk, right?
Yes, yeah.
And here's my thing: not all airbenders have to be monks, and not all monks were airbenders. Like those are, like they're not the same thing. So like,
I agree. Yeah.
And benders are born.
I think okay, so Aang is a monk, yes, but not all airbenders are monks.
Yes.
And Aang is also you say a sorcerer. I would say all airbenders are sorcerers.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are also monks. But Aang specifically, and more importantly, the Avatar, to me, that's a warlock. 100%.
Because of what we find out in Legend of Korra.
Yeah, so spoilers if anybody hasn't seen Korra yet. Yeah. But part of being the Avatar is you're bonded to Rava, which is the spirit of light.
Yes.
And through Rava, that's the only way you're able to learn
hold all four elements.
So
and even the Avatar state is like a pure warlock state, pretty much. You're drawing all the knowledge and power of all the previous avatars.
Yeah. So like born with the power, sure. Like all benders are sorcerers, yes, but the Avatar is definitely a warlock.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. And then sometimes a monk.
Yeah, but then again, like if you were to classify Aang in D&D terms, he would not be a monk. Like you could play an Aang type character as the like elements monk, but Aang does not channel ki. He doesn't like fight hand. Like he doesn't have all the other characteristics of a D&D monk.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually.
So like his magic purely, if you were like, I want to use a 4-element magic caster, I would choose a sorcerer.
I agree. A wizard. Yeah. Because I feel like Avatar does such a good job at taking like those martial arts forms and applying them to different types of bending. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And but for me, that's an Eastern interpretation of somatic components to the spell, right? But wizard does all this weird shit, Doctor Strange does like that thing. That's all the same. It's just that's just a different interpretation of those somatic components. Whereas I can see someone being like, oh, they're martial artists. It's like, no, not really. But
because whenever you see like a rock benders, they all lift rocks in this with like the same motions. They all throw rocks with the same motion. All airbenders have the same motions. So
right.
Yeah, that is definitely true. I have from Zuri and from the Rage of Dragons.
Our lists are so similar. I put Siora and all the gifted.
Yeah, the gifted are
all sorcerers. Born with the power through a very specific line of blood. Only, I think, what did they say? Like 3% of the population is gifted. Yeah. Definitely.
That is the majority of my list right there.
I'll just add a little bit more to the overall list here. So I put new types from the Gundam universe, which is a sci-fi, but they're like beings who, because of being born in space, their genetic makeup is different, but gives them these like psychic abilities. I think I mixed up some of my warlock and sorcerer list, but it's fine. Wonder Woman, I put as a sorcerer because some of the powers she has come from being of the blood of gods type of thing. I put the Jedi. I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I put Elsa from Frozen.
I was like, Elsa.
I put the Scarlet Witch from the Marvel Universe, especially the MCU. There's a little bit of like, so for anyone who hasn't seen WandaVision, even prior to that, her getting her powers from the Infinity Stone, whichever stone it was. I think it's the Soul Stone, or the Mind Stone, actually.
Wasn't it? I thought it was reality for some reason.
The one, whichever one's in Loki's staff, because
Yeah.
that's the one they Hydra's like dissecting.
Mhm.
So that's a cool sorcerer's origin, being a test subject. That's
Yeah.
tried and true. But then also, if you've seen WandaVision, you know what I talk about. I won't spoil it because I don't think you guys have seen it yet.
I have not, but I'm not going to.
It's worth watching.
I'm
It's
not
really
going to
good.
watch it.
But yeah, she's like destined to sort of be where she is, and her powers aren't all from that interaction, I guess is how I can say it. Yeah, and then I put Gandalf, but I would agree that Gandalf is probably more of a warlock. And with that said, Will, let's get into your kindergarten explanation of warlock and also your relationship to warlock.
First of all, Vatu didn't do anything wrong.
Whoa, man.
Oh my god.
No. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. The
That's the-
darkness and
okay.
evil.
This is a good point though, because when you say warlock, people picture the dark avatar, like whatever that guy's name is, Uncle fucking I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
Fucking jackass. He and channeling Vatu, that's what people picture when you say warlock. Well, warlock can also be Aang.
Yep.
Not all patron deities have to be bad. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
Warlocks. Actually, I'm really happy I looked into this one. Again, like I will say that my D&D knowledge is quite mediocre compared to you two, but especially when it comes to magic, because I've in the past I've definitely I'll just like hit something and kill it to death with a stick. But I actually really enjoy Warlock, and like doing some like research, I guess, into like characters. For examples, a lot of them are Warlocks. That like I definitely always thought were kind of cool. So I might need to refer to you guys when it comes to like the crunch of gameplay.
Sure.
Because I think that's definitely how we like define Warlocks compared to others, especially. So I mean, like Warlocks get their powers and magical abilities from some form of deity, or I guess some sort of like supernatural entity, is the way I see it. Not necessarily a god. I guess that's my take on it. I mean, at the basic level, it's just eldritch invocations.
Yeah, your powers coming from an entity who's your patron, who's
Yeah.
Knowingly or unknowingly supplying you with that power, and you're channeling their power through yourself. It's like my default was to say dark, but I don't think it always has to be. It's the dark equivalent of a paladin or a cleric. You're channeling some divine light.
Or like, I guess like the less like physical version of it. And like, again, with like magic, it's definitely like a lot of the possibilities are kind of endless to an extent. Because like the way I understand Warlock is like, you have like X amount of uses for your magic. You have like, and like my understanding is that like your levels of spells, I guess, aren't as like restrictive to you. So you could start off with like a higher level spell, I think, and then sort
Not
of
quite.
kind of
but there is like what the warlock gets that other classes don't get is the ability to cast spells at will without any cost. So there's certain spells you just choose and get to know, and you just know them and can cast them whenever you want without expending spell slots, without material components. So one of those spells, a good example is like Mask of Many Faces, and all that ability is the disguise self spell, but you can cast it whenever you want, unlimited amount of times. Whereas if a wizard had that same spell, if they cast it 3 times, they have no ability to cast that spell anymore unless they use higher spell slot levels, type of thing.
Yeah, and like I mean, again, if you want to get into, I guess like the metagaming is it's all dependent on whether or not your deity entity patron is satisfied, which I think is like kind of cool. Um,
Yeah.
so like if you have like just like an absolute like dick of a patron who just is like so like if you don't know like if you're gonna have these abilities depending on the day or whatever,
Yeah.
like I think that's like kind of cool, which I think you kind of mentioned maybe before on an earlier discussion, like when you were talking about like critical role, like it was like the stranger or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one that reads like a warlock. The
Mhm.
Traveler is the name.
Yeah, yeah,
It reads like a warlock relationship, but that's actually that player is a cleric.
yeah.
Um, so
Which
and
is
I think that's sort of the beauty in it is like depending on who you ask, what's the difference? You know what I
exactly
mean? Like,
Literally.
yeah.
That's what I was
'cause,
saying. Like, what is like? Are we gonna say that clerics aren't mages now? Like,
I but okay, so the difference for me though is that a warlock still uses arcane magic. Like their spell list is described as arcane spells, right?
mhm.
And a cleric has access to divine spells. So there's spells that don't use the weave of the arcane, which again, depending on the universe you're playing in or whatever fantasy we're talking about, that can be whatever the fuck you want it to be. But basically in D&D, the cleric's power is coming from a god. Like the gods who made the universe or made some specific thing about it.
which could also
Whereas
be an evil god too, right?
they could be, yeah. And
Um,
you know,
yeah, because
the
like
alignment of gods is always up for question. But I feel like warlock, it's usually something could be something way more powerful than that, or it could be something way less powerful than that, but still more powerful like in relation to all the other spellcasters, I guess. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I just feel like warlock is a flavoring tool that the other spellcasting classes don't have access to as much.
Yeah.
yeah,
But sorry.
definitely. Um, and like again, like a lot of like the characters that I was coming up for like for my list, actually, I think are like some of the cooler characters in fantasy. Um, but I mean, I think when we were talking about clerics, like you had, I think you or Luca, one of you two, had mentioned that like early clerics were just like monks, right? Just like the European like Christian monk kind of thing,
Yeah.
or like kind of had like that I guess aesthetic, and like that could also be like a warlock, right? But I mean, like when I first heard of like warlock, the first thing I was thinking was just a male witch. Because like you know like the movie The Covenant.
No,
um
but the funny thing is like some people when they hear witch, they just think of a female wizard.
Mhm.
So if a warlock's a male witch, is a wizard.
yeah.
I just think the thing we said on every episode is like the name for this class is kind of weird. And with this
Fighters.
episode, especially, it's like you don't even know what I'm talking about, you know? Like he's a sorcerer. What the fuck does that mean specifically? You know?
Mhm.
Yeah, I could imagine like when whoever wrote the 5th edition book, they were like, yo, we have X amount of pages that we need to fill. Let's come up with something. So, but like I think the warlock class is like kind of cool. Again, like it's just kind of like I like the idea of like everyone has like their like you know like you have like a D&D wizard who spent like years learning how to do a fireball or something like that, and you have like sorcerers are just magic that are just innate abilities. But I kind of like warlock where it's just like some like average Joe just like cut a deal with something,
Yeah.
and then may have like just now they have like access to like all these like insane powers, um which it definitely comes up like when I was looking up warlock, when I just typed in warlock D&D, like I guess like comparisons, one of the first things that came up to me was like um Faust, you know, like the story, like the Faustian devil, kind of like where like some average person makes, which is definitely like a trope nowadays, where it's just like some average person just cuts a deal with the devil, and now they have like all these cool powers and skills and abilities and charisma and all this stuff like that. But definitely comes at a cost, right?
Right.
Which like I kind of like that restrictive I guess, or that closedness of the warlock, where it's just kind of like at any moment this entity can just like yank on the chains and then you just like stop doing. So like I kind of like the idea of just like some like average person just like accidentally making a pact with an entity, and like now that they're at the mercy of it, but like
And there's so many different ways you can play, like role play that out. Like could be like you were given power, go do your thing, but when that's done, you have to free me from my prison. And fuck, you don't want to do that. That could spell the end of the world. Or you only, the limitations of the warlock class being spell slots, which you only have 2 for the majority of the game. That could be like you're stealing power from this entity. And if you go more than 2 spell slots within a given time, they'll notice. And when they notice, that won't be pretty, type of thing.
Like
or maybe your body only withholds this much power from this entity as a channel, a conduit to it. Like, so I think there's like a lot of area for to explain the limitations of the warlock class and also that relationship. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
I love warlocks.
Yeah, I definitely think the role playing aspect is like kind of cooler, just because it comes up with that magic as magic having a cost,
right?
That is a little bit more, I guess, like defined or refined compared to like sorcerers and wizards, right?
Well, like wizard, I find not so much, because the cost is you have to know it, you have to have the components, and you have to do it right.
Yeah, and all
those are all
must be met.
Like that's high cost, and you can only do it a certain amount of times before your body's like, I can't do anymore. But sorcerer still has like those physical limitations, but they don't need the knowledge. And warlock is in that same camp where I don't need to know how to do this. I just can't do this more than twice or I'll fucking die.
Yeah. Or like my patron entity could just like annihilate me at any moment. For example, if you have like Cthulhu or something. But I also like how like just flipping through like the 5th edition book, like it even refers to like having like Fey entities, which I think is kind of cool. Like being blessed by like this like Fey character.
Like when we played, Luca ran a game that Will and I played, and I had an Archfey patron. And I think Archfey again is cool because not as powerful as a god, but seen as a god to people who reside in the Feywild for sure. And definitely has more power than the average person in the prime material plane. So they're like, yeah, here's some power. And just their nature just being like, they just want to be entertained. Like, yeah, let me give this scrawny mortal some power and see what the fuck happens. Like, just fuck around.
My favorite part of DMing was when we had our barbarian character become a warlock.
No, I think he was like a paladin, but he was for like an evil orc god. And you got to play, what was his name?
I got to play Ilnaval. I chose Ilnaval.
Yeah, that was your best character work for sure. I love that character.
Role playing.
Like, always chilling with a glass of wine. Oh, so good.
Warlocks are super, super cool. And actually, now looking back at my list, a couple of these were actually warlocks that I said were sorcerers. But that's the thing. Like, it's so.
It's definitely interchangeable, because especially when you're dealing with like, I got this power reluctantly, or like I never asked for this. I think you can go either way. Then it comes down to which class mechanic you want to play with. And I do think there's maybe a little bit more variation to the mechanics of a warlock. Whereas like a sorcerer, no matter what your origin is, you're always going to be a spellcasting class. Whereas warlock, you can be a spellcaster, but you can also be a fucking tank. And I feel like a lot of other classes don't have that range, I guess you could say.
I mean, like you could even start off with like another class and then become a warlock, like how you said with barbarian into warlock. I also I kind of like the idea of like for like role playing where it's just like someone's like trying to like make a pact with one entity, but then they like, for example, if there's like some sort of like enchantment like or chant, I guess you have to go through, but then they like fuck it up and get some like a different entity. like if you're trying to like make a pact with a different dimension, then it's just like you get automatically paired up with like someone who like another entity who's just like, yo, what the fuck?
Yeah, that man, I don't know why, but that reminded me of like the hormone monster from Big Face or Big Mouth when he gets like the decrepit one. It's like fuck.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think one of my favorite examples of a warlock that I could bring is John Constantine.
Yeah.
He's like one of my favorite, I guess, like characters. I've never really been into like the noir detective kind of thing, but like I fucking love Constantine. One of my favorite things, basically, just, like you have this power. I guess his connection is more so like heavenly, right? But it's definitely comes at a cost, and which is him going to die kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, Faust, like how I mentioned before, I think that's pretty much where D&D Warlock came from. Because that story is like several hundred years old now.
Right.
I think more so like in recent, I guess, content that we've seen is definitely Melisandre from Game of Thrones.
Yep. That's on the list.
Yeah, like she gets her powers from her lore, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I again, I love when a character thinks they're a paladin or a cleric and they've been a warlock the whole time.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, I'm serving the Lord of Light. It's like this fucked up like demon thing.
Child sacrifice.
Yeah.
To that end, I also like, I think I might have mentioned it before actually with paladins, but Shaman King, like the characters from that.
Yeah.
Or even I guess like even like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, where it's just you have like this entity that you're attached with, and they basically do all the fighting for you. But you could also perform skills that are like dependent on that entity that you're attached with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I find a lot of animes have warlocks, but like we could also call them monks. Like I have Naruto on my list, and so I think that fits into monk. Obviously, he's a ninja. Yeah. Also fits into sorcerer because he was born that way, but he's a warlock because inside of him is this fucking insane demon who just wants to destroy things.
Yeah, like I think like definitely like that like symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
I think is just key. Another one I'd say is Rasputin from the Hellboy universe.
Okay, yeah.
So that, I mean, pact with the devil again, Faustian, or I guess the elder gods, I should say, although they don't like specify, I don't think. One of my favorite ones would have to be like Nightwolf from the Mortal Kombat series. Gotta put on. He's I forget like which indigenous community he belongs with.
Yeah, I wasn't.
But yeah, he's a shaman, right? But he gains his powers from, I guess, whatever his community would call a great spirit. Yeah, I guess just like that, like shaman character, just in general,
like channeling, a greater being type of thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, which is kind of like, I guess I could also kind of cross over with druids, kind of, sort of, maybe more so the role-playing role, maybe not the mechanics, but also Quan Chi from Mortal Kombat. But although I think after hearing this discussion, I think maybe more so Sorcerer. Yeah. Oh yeah. We also, I think Gandalf, as well as like Saruman and any of the wizards, are warlocks because like they're like, first of all, that like all these characters, like all the 5 wizards aren't actual like humans.
Yeah,
like
right.
they're basically just magical entities, but they have their powers, and like they were created via Eru Iluvatar, which is like the chief deity who created the entirety of Tolkien's universe, right? So, I mean, without that connection, they're literally nothing. I mean, that's definitely warlockish.
Yeah, I like reading up on Gandalf 100%. Like, I can't remember how it was exactly phrased, but it was like, yeah, this is like a way, because you know better than I do, but he sent them specifically after a certain age because man had, fuck things up too much. And this was like his way to put man back on the right path, or Middle Earth back on the right path. But yeah, like you said, if their powers go away with their patron, then they're a warlock, which I think is the difference between sorcerer and warlock. Because sorcerer, like, that's in you and it's yours. It can get taken away like a myriad of ways. Like, like I said, losing your arm might lose you enough blood to make you not be able to access it. But if you tell your patron, fuck you, I'm out, this deal's over, or whatever, you get out of the deal somehow.
They're like tough shit.
Yeah, or you get some god to fucking kill the patron, and then your powers are gone. Like, and I think that's the difference. So, yeah, and not all warlocks have to serve evil gods. They can serve noble. I
also kind of like the idea of like a warlock powers being bestowed via a curse.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I guess like that ends. I guess maybe sort of like. I guess like the curse seal marks in Naruto, right?
Yeah.
Sort of ish.
So yeah, so like you could all like, it's tough because like obviously like Orochimaru is a person, like a mortal, right? So you could say that like Sasuke was a warlock at one point and Orochimaru was his patron, but I would almost see that more like sorcery, like you're tainting your genetic makeup to become something else, and those can be removed. So yeah, I wouldn't, like, I don't know if I was trying to play a Naruto game if Sasuke would map onto a warlock properly, but like that's a fair point. I think the seal marks.
Could you, like, I guess again, like I don't know the crunch aspect of D&D that well, but could you have like a wizard who also gains warlock powers?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so like I think maybe that would be a way to describe, or sorcerer, I should say, who somehow makes a pact with another being and then gets X amount of powers for a cost, or they have this relationship or whatever.
Yeah, I think a really cool thing about the three classes we're talking about, even because like sorcerer and warlock have the same casting ability, which is again charisma, and wizards have intelligence. I'm sure there are people who have done this. I find, though, the only synergy between the three classes for a multi-class aspect is between wizard and sorcerer, because you get access to meta magic. I guess we should have explained, but meta magic is the sorcerer, because their powers are innate and they don't care about the conditions. They can do things faster, more powerful. So you use this different sort of slot mechanic. You have points, sorcery points, and you can expel them to or you can expend them, to, cast a spell that usually takes 6 seconds in 2 seconds, or you can duplicate a spell. You spell cast one spell and then there's 2 fireballs. You can do stuff like that. And so I feel like a wizard, if he was like, man, that's really cool, how are you doing that? And like studied a sorcerer, they could learn that. Part of my campaign that I ran, that Luca was in, there was like a month, I think, in game time where your character was like, man, how the fuck does the sorcerer do that? You were like, experimenting on how you could cast your cantrip faster. And it turned out the answer was like a material component that was deep within the skin of this sorcerer. But the ultimate reveal is like you could find that somewhere in the world. And if you had that as a component, you could use that to speed up some of your spells, type of thing. So like that's a cool way to explain it, how the sorcerer does what he does, type of thing. But yeah, sorry again, because like I don't know, I've never played a sorcerer and been like, I need to spellcast, or I need to multi-class into a different spell casting class, you know what I mean? Same with like warlock. I think a lot of people are very much turned off by the limited spell slots, but I just think the warlock does so much more where you don't need them. Like they'd be nice to have, but like it would take away from what that class is. So yeah, I don't know.
In terms of like mixing classes, I think the cool part about D&D is like the rule set you get is just like the baseline. Like you can just do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
Like that's why for me, like when I read the wizard class, it's like how can the wizard not be the most powerful of all magic casters when they could like just study a sorcerer? And if you have like a genius, like a savant of a wizard, like they could just become a sorcerer on their own, like learning or even like figuring out how to trick a patron god into gaining their power. Like why couldn't somebody who can learn the arcane abilities just like learn this other stuff?
Yes, but that also depends on your DM, because in the game rules, it's like, okay, if you're a wizard and you want to do this, you have to take this feat, or you have to study for this amount of hours to try to do this, or you know, if you want to make a pact with a god, you have to multi-class into whatever the fuck. For me though, like because your character was that like high intelligence, it was like, yeah, if you put time into this, you can learn it just like everything else you've learned. But there was like levels to it. Like I couldn't give you things for free, because then why was the sorcerer even playing? You should have just played wizard. So I definitely think there's balances, and when you're home brewing stuff like that, there is an opportunity for it to become like super unbalanced for one person. And I think that sucks, because then like the sorcerer's like, okay, so what do I do here anyways? Like,
well, that's why I've always read it like that. Like sorcerer just like, oh, I'm just born kind of talented. It's like, yeah, that's whatever. Like that's
cool. I see.
Like that's how I've read it. That's why I was never like, I don't want to be I want to be a genius wizard. Like
see, I play sorcerers at the beginning of their discovery of their powers. Or like maybe they've had it since they were a kid, but now they're finally like, I have to do something about this, because like the sorcerer I played in your campaign, it was like she was trying to hide her powers her whole life, and then one day they like came out and like hurt somebody, and now they have to leave the village because like they can't come back until they get control of it. So it was like, okay, well, I'm becoming so much more powerful incrementally, but like I didn't realize it was this intense type of thing. So for me, there is still like that progression that the wizard has, and it's not just like, yeah, I pretty much know everything, because like you still level up as a sorcerer. You don't like know everything off the bat and do it quickly. But I think as a DM and as a player, for me, breaking the magic system, like where a wizard can't, you cast your spell, you make your run, and that's your turn. For me, like being like, oh shit, so I can cast 2 spells with a bonus action. That's so much fun for me to be like, and like using different spells to like interact with each other. Like, okay, I'm going to use my bonus action to cast Grease, and then I'm going to use my action to cast Fireball. And now we got something cooking,
Yeah. For the role play aspect, I think Warlock honestly offers the most fun, especially as a DM. Just you can like mess with your players. Like
you get to be a god. Yeah.
I actually did think of a really good example of a warlock from Malazan. Rulad Sengar. He is like he becomes a warlock through grabbing a sword that was imbued with the powers of a god, and then that god essentially gives. I think I talked about Rulad. Every time he dies, he goes back to the god and gets sent back to his body. So like essentially
Dondarrion style.
Yeah, and every time he comes back, he's stronger. Like he's faster, stronger, a better fighter, but like slowly losing his like mind.
Okay.
So that's like sort of like a unwilling, like unanticipated warlock turn.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen Hunter x Hunter?
Only the first arc, I think.
Okay. So you haven't gotten into Nen? Like, have you seen the magic system of Hunter x Hunter?
No, not in depth, no.
It is my favorite magic system in all of anime.
Wow.
I would highly, highly recommend finishing Hunter x Hunter. There is a character in it who like essentially dedicates his life to martial arts, and he does like a super cool development where he like essentially he spends his entire day like he puts his hands together in prayer, and then like essentially just repeats the same action like prayer punch to like thank the gods for his ability of martial arts, and like through like years and years of just constantly doing like 10,000 praise and punches a day, he like gains enlightenment, and then
Oh.
his like power is like a giant, like golden 100 armed like statue,
Yeah.
and that's like very Warlock-esque because he's sort of like drawing the essence of like the martial arts abilities that he's learned.
Mhm.
You guys have to finish it. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. I got a few examples here. I think Will. So the actual Warlock on Critical Role is Ford, and multi-classes into Paladin, which I think makes a little bit more sense. Paladin again and Warlock super similar to me. I'd rather play a Warlock because I don't know, they look cooler. But so he has like this sword that's like covered in barnacles and like he can summon it. One of the subclasses of being a warlock or your patron is like the hex blade. And so this is sort of like what I played in your campaign, Luca, when I was the warlock. The second character was like I had found this sword that was connected to like this archfey giant treant thing.
Yeah.
And it was like do my bidding type of thing. Restore the sword, blah blah blah. But that's sort of what this character is the same. He's like this sea serpent entity that's trying to get him to release him from his watery prison. And I don't know, it's a really cool, like he has to like swallow the sword to like become more powerful and like bond to the sword. It's like a really messed up relationship. And eventually he's like, fuck this. This is getting way too intense. But when he sort of left, he like throws his sword into lava to break his bond with it. But when he leaves the service of that deity, anytime he tries to go onto the seas, he's immediately attacked by like other people who serve this thing. And they're like undead and just being solely controlled by this warlock, or sorry, this deity. So that's pretty cool. Here's an example off the board here. The Ice King from Adventure Time, absolute warlock. Like you said, Will, his powers come from a curse. He puts on this crown, which give him extraordinary powers, but it's at a cost. And he loses his sanity eventually. Just a heartbreaking episode. God damn. Light from Death Note. Obviously, it's literally a deal with the devil every time.
Oh yeah, I can't believe I didn't think of that. That's a great one.
So this is sort of what you were talking about. I think you said they're like Spriggans or what? I don't remember what the name was. Spren. So my example was Hal from Hal's Moving Castle. Same thing. He bonds with a fire demon that gives him more power, so he can become who he is. But Calcifer is the name. But through that bond, he like starts to lose his humanity a little bit, and eventually, I think it starts killing him. And he becomes like this monster demon type thing. Obviously a great film, like it's just absolutely beautiful. I haven't read the book yet, but we'll get there. I put Blackbeard from, historical fiction.
The pirate?
Yeah, the pirate.
Or from
because,
One Piece?
No. The pirate. Because it was like, yeah, he like made a deal with Davy Jones or whatever the fuck.
Right.
And that's why people feared him. But it's all smoke and mirrors, depending on who you ask. But Avatar, Rava. Cool example is the Silver Surfer. Norin Rand, I think his real name is, but his powers come only from Galactus. And if he leaves Galactus, he'll have no more powers. And it's not something he was like, Galactus, give me your powers. Galactus was like, I'm coming to eat your planet. And he was like, wait, if you don't eat my planet, I'll lead you to other planets. I'll be your planet finding guy, which was like an honorable thing. But then eventually he starts to lose his way and no longer differentiates between planets with like life on them and not sentient planets. So that's a pretty cool. Caecilius, also from Marvel, the villain in Doctor Strange, the movie. Obviously he made a pact with Dormammu. It's pretty warlock as it gets. And then the last one I have on my list is Blue Beetle from DC Comics. He gets this scarab, this Martian technology bonds to him and gives him this suit, sort of like Iron Man style, but it's not something he asked for. And it has a little bit of control over him. Yeah. So that's my warlock. Anybody else got any other examples?
Oh well, when you mentioned the armor, like borderline guts from Berserk, he wears the Berserker armor. Like that gives him a lot of power, but it like also messes with his like sanity as he's wearing it. He like goes berserk when he wears it.
So let's get now into Artificer. So I think my interpretation of this was changed drastically when I started researching other people's examples of it. But basically, an artificer is like a tinkerer, someone who, unlike the wizard who dedicates their time to studying how magic works, this person finds ways. They're not a sorcerer, they're not a warlock. There's no deal with a higher being. There's no innate powers. They're just like, I'll find another way to do that because I can't do that. So yeah, the artificer is like someone who imbues objects with magic, someone who uses objects to replicate magical effects. Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is just through examples. And I would say sort of a modern example that doesn't really fit into fantasy, but is I think a good sort of reference is like Iron Man. Iron Man's not a superhero. He's just a dude with a suit. And when you take him out of the suit, he's still a genius, but he's no longer super powered. And I think that's what an artificer is, someone who builds themselves up in a way through their genius or through their, uncanny ability to create things and, redefines the reality around them by doing so. But I know,
but
you hate artificers.
It's not a class, it's a subclass of wizard. Like they imbue items with arcane powers, right? Like that's, if you aren't yourself a wizard without your item. Like if you said an artificer is like somebody who was given magical items, then without those magical items, they're just a regular person. But like an artificer, somebody who creates like through a very high knowledge of arcane abilities, they imbue these powers into objects. Like that's just a wizard.
I understand that logic.
It's like if you're drawing runes on a sword, for example, and you call that an artificer, like you need to have the knowledge and the power to imbue those runes with magic. Like you can't, like, unless you're saying that just the act of drawing a specific shape draws power to it, then like, okay, maybe we can talk about something there. But like,
yeah,
if you're just imbuing arcane power into anything that you're creating, like you're a wizard.
I don't know.
How do you feel about it, Will?
See, when I heard of artificer, the first thing that came to mind was actually like an alchemist, or also just like kind of like the mad scientist inventor type.
Exactly. Yeah.
Again, like getting into it, honestly, the first thing that came to mind, like when I started to look into it a little bit, was like the enchanter skill from like Elder Scrolls games, particularly Skyrim again. Where it's just kind of like you use like in that skill, like you use I guess like magical materials to create and like shape things in a certain way. But like I view like the artificer as like more of like shit, I can't think of the word. But I guess like almost like God damn it, I can't think of it.
A gazetteer, like a
no. Oh shit, I can't think of it. Sorry. Kind of like that, like a profession, almost like a craftsman, I guess.
Yeah.
Is like a craftsman of magic, where they just like maybe they get like their materials from a wizard or sorcerer, or like maybe leftover, I guess, just like magical stuff from a battle or whatever, and then just like imbue objects with it because like fuck it, they can. So like maybe like again jumping back to Skyrim, like someone who blends like blacksmithing with just, I guess, the use of magical materials in blacksmithing, I guess.
Yeah,
but
I would say like to what you're saying, like Thomas Edison, right? Like
yeah.
that's an artificer.
I think a good example in fantasy would actually be Nikola Tesla in the Order 1887, which
Okay.
is he's kind of like their like gadget guy,
Right.
like the kind
Or
of
even
like
like Da Vinci in the Assassin's Creed games.
yeah, example
I made this new
exactly,
device for you type of thing.
or that dude
Except
in James
they
Bond.
have magic in them. Like you're not making things that like Iron Man uses technology. Like sure, without the suit, he's nothing. Like he's the genius that made it. But like as soon as you add like you're imbuing arcane power into something, you're no longer just a dude.
Well, I think it's how you flavor it too, right? Like you can play an
Mhm.
artificer that knows nothing about magic.
Yeah,
Okay, so
they
like
just know
another
that.
example I think would be like Asami from Korra, right? Like not a
Okay.
bender at all, doesn't
Mhm.
have access to that magic system, but can create things that give her that same, like ability to be there.
Like a
Mhm.
Like you,
chemist.
yeah, like I think there's like I guess it depends how you flavor it. I can understand what you're saying though. If you're
Yeah.
someone who's casting magic into items and then using those magic items, that's a wizard, right? That's just an enchanter,
Yeah,
which
like
is a type of wizardry.
yeah, because I also thought like maybe just like a wizard is just like I don't feel like doing the dishes, so I'll just have like this I don't know, this dish rag that does everything for me. Fuck it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah.
like
Like
make
I
life
created
easier.
a magical dish rag to wash the dishes, and the artificer is like, I've created this Rube Goldberg machine that creates dishes and it runs on magical power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, a good example would be like also from God of War, God of War 3 in particular, with like the workshop mission, which is basically like the labyrinth is actually just like this massive like puzzle thing to access this dude's labyrinth to meet up and get these powers and stuff like that, where it's just like shit, I can't remember. It's Icarus's dad. I can't remember in the myth, Anyways,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, anyways, he just like it's a mad scientist kind of thing. Like how you said, like almost like a Rube Goldberg, where it's just like all this unnecessary shit to basically produce some sort of mechanism that like performs a task that involves magic.
Right.
Yeah. So
And I think, like we were saying earlier, like you were saying, Will, at the top of the show, magic in our history was a way to describe things that we didn't have scientific answers for. I think the artificer is almost like the inverse of that. Like, yeah, I see that you're curing wounds and I raise you one bandage, you know? And so for the game mechanic, it's working the same. Like you're casting cure wounds, but like I had a player in a campaign I ran, and when they casted cure wounds as an artificer, they like brought out this device like with this like little enchanted gem on it, and like when they ran the gem across the wound, like they could x-ray it, and like these hands would come out and like and like start sealing the wound. And it was like, yeah, the same effect was achieved. You cured the wounds, but like you didn't do it through like a divine spell casting ability, right? It was just,
yeah,
it
like
didn't magically seal up. It was like, yeah, all these things happen because I designed this tool to fix things. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
kind of like a surgeon's or doctor's tools, or like like using like an X-ray machine kind of thing. Like you don't know, necessarily understand how the magic works, but maybe you just know how to use the machine.
Right.
And
Or like if the wizard has like floating orbs, like dancing lights to, illuminate the dungeon you're traveling in, the artificer might be like, hey, we don't have a wizard, but I made this. And it's just like a floating candle that has like little like drone propellers on the bottom of it. It's like the same thing. It achieved the same effect, but it wasn't magic. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
and actually, before we started, like when you were off camera for a bit, I kind of mentioned to Luca where it was kind of like I think this class maybe not so much as a player character, but maybe more so for like I think it would be like a cool NPC.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
See, I'm okay with calling it a class as long as you're not using magic. Like as soon as you're like, I'm imbuing this with arcane, it's like in that example, you're like, I put these propellers and I understand the physics of like lift, and I created a candle that can fly using these propellers, and it uses like gears and all this stuff. Like, okay, and then like you're like, I sent it to a wizard to like enchant it to make the gears constantly move. no
okay.
problem. That's fine. But if you're like, I imbued this thing with magic myself, it's like, you're a wizard. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's that. I don't disagree with your point, and like I do think the artificer can step on the toes of the wizard a little bit. But if I was playing one, I wouldn't play it like I know magic. But I think too, like Will was saying again at the beginning of the show, in our history, at one point in time, and not to say that it's wrong, but you know, lightning was looked at as some like magical force that, you know, the gods were sending down to do whatever the fuck. But you know, an artificer, like the wizard might believe like, oh no, you silly mortals, you know, the lightning's not from the gods. It's actually the, you know, the magic in the air, and then the fucking temperature shifts and the arcade weave gets pulled upon, and that's what creates lightning. And the artificer's like, no, I don't think so. You're actually like, here, I could do it. He like pulls out a glove that like, you know, and it was just like, oh, neat, you know, not how I would do that, but like that's a way to do it.
Yeah, like kind of like it just I think of just like steampunk.
Yeah, obviously,
and
yeah. That's the, like, you know, you look at like Atlantis, the Disney movie,
Mhm.
like all that stuff is like artificer stuff.
and just even just like real world alchemists, you know, like John Dee or Nicholas Flamel and all that stuff, or you know, like the whole philosopher's stone myth where they just people are like these people are creating magic, but it's just like through chemistry and like I guess like maybe like grounded more so in like science, I guess.
Yeah. And okay, great point. But that brings me to a question for Luca. Would you feel the same about the imbuing of magical items if they were from magical properties? Like, say there's like, again, this is a magical world. So there's a certain cave that produces magical crystals, and those crystals are the ones that wizards use to cast, I don't know, charm person. So what if the artificer goes and gets one of those crystals and smashes it into some sort of device like a camera, and they're like, they build this camera that could like exert the same magic out of the crystal, and they press the button that starts the chain reaction, and now there's a flash, and now it's charm person. Does that piss you off still?
No, that's great. Like that's exactly what I would want it to be, where like you understand like the magical properties of an item and know how to exploit them, but you yourself don't have the power inside you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Like that's like the first step for like fantasy turning into sci-fi.
Yes.
You know, where like you no longer have wizards, you have people that understand the laws of that world and can exploit them in any way, and they just become regular people that just know the science of that world, you know.
I love cities that are like, this city runs on magic now.
Yeah,
we have floating cities because giant crystals, and we made them into, you know.
My background, that's Moonspawn, and like you find out that it's like a civilization of creatures that learned how to create these floating rocks, and nobody else knows how to do it. Like,
what's a city called in Legend of Korra? That's, I think, would be an example.
The capital city or something.
Like
yeah.
Like maybe like
Republic City.
Republic City. Like you have like light rail transit, but it's just like operated by
earthbenders.
Yeah. So I don't know.
I think a lot of that, switching the wizard in like to work with the artificers, because like wizards in that example would be the benders, and the artificers are the non-benders who still got to live with these fucks, like, you know. So I love the idea of magical societies that work off artificers being like, okay, that spell's really cool. What if we made that on a large scale? You know, so that it's not just one dispel magic brings the whole fucking city down. There's like, you know,
like it, yeah. I don't know. Like I guess the way I see it is just it's like the same result, but it's just a different alternate path to it.
Exactly.
And maybe a little bit more difficult because it's I would view it as like someone who doesn't, I guess, have like that skill or like the training or whatever, but they have like this, I don't want to say like rudimentary, but like just, yeah, like the craftsman understanding of, if I put X and Y together, Z will happen.
Yeah, and I think it'd be cool to also explore a world where the majority of the spellcasters are artificers. And And then there's
Steampunk.
like a small society of people who are wizards, and they come and they're like, "What is this defilement of the weave?" You know, but like you guys aren't even reciting words before you use the light spell. That's like blasphemy.
Yeah, like kind of like the Tevinter Imperium and Dragon Age. It's like rolling
Exactly.
into steampunk, being like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
we're here to dominate you just for this abomination that you people have created. Creating clocks without magic, I don't think so.
yeah, yeah. And definitely too, because like I think a lot of wizards, like we've talked a lot about wizard academies in this episode alone, and that's very that's very much like a privileged society and a exclusive society. Like it's either you're born with the power, so you get to come here, you're somehow able to join this academy by whatever means they use to judge, but not everybody has access to those academies, right?
Yeah.
So the artificer is sort of like the answer to that. Where it's like, well, we're not going to let you guys control us with magic. Like we also, if there's a science to like, oh, you have to say this and do this, there's probably an alternate way to achieve the same thing.
Yeah. Like kind of like, I guess, like real world allegory that I keep thinking of is like, you have like the engineers who create like a Mercedes Benz, but then you have like the mechanic who maybe didn't have access to be the engineer, but they can like supercharge the fuck out of a car because like they can't, which I think is kind of cool.
Or even simpler, there's a cheetah, and then there's humans who are like, gotta get away from that. Here's a bike, Cheetah's like, no fair. You don't know how to run. It's like, I don't give a fuck, man. My bike goes fast, There's a really interesting anime. It's one of my favorites. It's called Gargantua on the Vendor's Planet. Spoiler alert. But basically the whole anime is just asking the question of physical bodily improvement or rely on technology improving. So there's like mech pilots versus like these symbiotic like weird human evolution type squid things, whereas like the earth was dying, so we either go off into space in our spaceships or we learn to survive the rising oceans of the world. And some people picked turn ourselves into squids, and some people picked no, I'm fucking out of here. And that created like this century or like millennia long war between like the whale squids and like the humans, just ideological differences. And I think like that's like the artificers are the mech pilots and the wizards are the squid people.
I'd be a mech pilot. I'd go to artificer. I'm not.
Yeah.
What would it get you to play an artificer, Luca? Because this is sounding near the bottom now.
I don't hate them. Like, it just, if you say that you're imbuing something with magic, it's a subclass to me. I don't hate the concept. Like, I love it actually. Like, I think adding it in core was super cool. Like, the idea of like the like magician mechanic is like a super interesting thing. And to me, it always sounds like I think of it as a subclass to wizard because I think a wizard would be the best at it. Like.
Yeah, I could even see like a wizard being like, hey, it's not fair we treat people like this. I'm starting my own school. Yeah. And then just teaches like normal people how to make these machines type of thing. And
I think it also depends on like the magic systems. For example, the example you gave, like if there's like a crystal that a wizard uses to cast a spell, and then artificer just finds that crystal and like figures out how to use it, then it's like in that world, it's almost like magic is not even like a human it's like an energy that exists and wizards know how to manipulate it. Whereas like I like the idea that you can't really replicate what a mage would do with just like the raw materials.
Oh, okay.
Because it's like for a wizard, for example, you need to like recite the spell and have the somatic or have the physical components and make the motions or whatever. And then it's like if you can replicate that with just the materials and then like a piece of technology, it, to me personally, just for like flavor, it sort of cheapens the magic in general. Like it cheapens all of the mages, like even like gods and sorcerers and warlocks. It's like, well, why can't you just replicate a warlock on a massive scale and you're essentially a god that's an artificer?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think they even do it like in Naruto, where I remember like the first episodes of Boruto I was watching, they have this new technology which makes scrolls so you can cast any jutsu, without knowing it or being able to do it. Which I was immediately like put off by it. I was like, that takes away like the whole
point almost. Like, what's the
just
the
so
point
that
of your ninja way then? Like, what's the point of your ninja
yeah,
path?
but like we're more powerful if all of our people have access to the Rasengan. True, but as a viewer, it's like, but that's like, but like it makes sense on the societal level. Like,
I know, but
why
it
wouldn't
cheapens
we?
the fact that he can do it. It's like, okay, well now everybody can do it with a piece of paper. Like, okay, that's
exactly
like, okay, all right.
So see, even your answer to that is like how you feel about the wizard and the artificer type of thing, right? Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah. That's fair. I think that's a. Do you have any examples
of artificers?
Yeah,
only borderline. There's one character in Malazan named Icarium, and he is like, he's like obsessed with time, and he creates like clocks all over the world, and he's lived for like an unknown amount of time, but he keeps losing his memory.
Oh no.
And he always has like somebody with him that travels with him because he's such a danger to the world. Like I still don't know his whole backstory, but essentially he's like extremely, extremely powerful, and when he gets angry, he'll just destroy everything around him. But he is also like a creator, so he's made a bunch of like magical constructs, mostly to like measure time and try and figure out, I guess, what time is or something. Like, so I've gotten to the end of his story, but he is maybe the strongest example. There's like those also from Avatar season 1 and I think the Northern Air Temple, where like when they get there, they're like, they had taken over the temple, and they're creating like
the
flying
machines. Yeah. Good point.
They made the air balloons and stuff. I didn't even like them. I didn't like them. They desecrated the temple, man. That scene where Aang gets to like the mural and there's like all those like pipes and steam going through, and he like gets mad. It's like, I would be furious if I saw that. Like, that's so disrespectful.
People gotta live, man. The world goes on.
I guess. Who cares about morality and
morale? Come on.
These gosh darn really airships.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I just had an example come into my head and then I totally forgot it.
Me when I.
You don't have any.
Me when I. No.
Actually, there's a couple in Stormlight Archive. Like, there's things called fabrials, which are like sort of these like gloves with gems on them that some characters use to like cast spells, and depending on the color of gem and how much stormlight is in it, you can do different things. Like, they can turn like random objects into food. They can turn like wood into metal, or like vice versa and stuff like that. And that's sort of like they're not people with like actual magical powers. They like channel it. They use the fabrial itself to do it. But then there's like other reveals about that too, where it's like, I still don't understand it. It's very complicated. It's like a legit science book, honestly, at some points.
The example I thought of was from Love, Death, Robots. Specifically the episode in the first season. I think it's episode 6 or 9. Can't remember. It's called Good Hunting.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful, breathtaking episode. Mm-hmm. So cool. It deals with like it's a fictional approach to what would you call that? Industrialization.
Yeah.
In Eastern Japan, I want to say. Could be China. But basically, there's these creatures, the hooligans, who are innately magical, shape-shifting, like Oni or like demons or spirits. But one of them, from being around, their mother dies, so from being around humans, loses the ability to do that, so becomes more human than hybrid, and is stuck in that form. And I won't spoil why, but and if you don't want to know the ending, but there's a beautiful scene at the end where this guy who's a train mechanic and likes to make clockwork creatures reconstructs a body for her that can like transform shape-shifting, and it's really cool. That's another one where he's replicating the magical ability she was able to do without magic. He's completely off of technology. Honestly, that episode is like the basis of the campaign I ran that you were in, Luca. Just inspired me like completely. Other examples, Megamind, in the same like there's a lot that are still like in that Iron Man vein.
Yeah.
Like I'm not a superhero, but I don't want to be put upon. So I'd say Mr. Freeze is in there, Doctor Doom as well. Obviously Lex Luthor, that mech suit villain or hero, all that falls under Artificer. I'd say Asami, I said earlier. Tyrion Darrington is one from Critical Role, just like an absolute. He's like this guy who his family's just really rich, so he just buys a bunch of like scrolls with spells and like magical items and stuff. But he has a really cool character arc. Yeah, definitely worth checking out. I put the Rocketeer again in that mech suit vein. He's just a dude with a jetpack, but what's stopping a dude with a jetpack from being Superman? Bulma from Dragon Ball Z, can put a car into like a pill capsule. Goku could lift the car, but like, she's got to get the car out some way too. Tails from Sonic, that whole universe, just this, Fox. Okay, so this was actually pretty funny. On the first episode of this series, I said Hiccup was a barbarian. And then in the episode we did on Rangers, I was like, sorry guys, my bad. Hiccup's actually a Ranger. And now I'm like, wait a sec. Hiccup's actually an artificer because he creates, these mechanical devices that people can interact with dragons and, be able to train them, and changes their whole society to fit. So maybe he's also an artificer. What a character. You could play Hiccup like 3 different ways in this game. There's Percy DeRollo, also from Critical Role, was a fighter gunslinger, but so not an artificer at all, not multi-classed or anything. Multi-classed into Warlock, I think. That's a different story. But he invented guns because obviously it's a fantasy world. So he invented guns, and that was his sort of artificer thing. So like, yeah, I can, I can't shoot an arrow or cast fireball, but I've shot you in the chest. So Jimmy Neutron.
Yes.
Thought it was funny. Yeah, that'll do it for my list. I thought it was like when I began searching for artificers, I was like, I have no idea. Like I couldn't even think of one. And then as soon as I saw Iron Man, I was like, oh yeah. Like, duh.
There's that guy also from Korra, the other inventor. I forgot his name. He created like the giant mech suits they use.
Oh, like her dad.
Yeah.
I can't remember. He sponsors their Avatar bending. What's it called? Bender Ball, whatever the fuck it's called.
Yeah.
He sponsors their team. Yeah, but yeah, all like the non-benders. Like we said, there were monks a couple episodes ago too, and that's true for like the foot soldiers. But then the machines they make to combat the benders definitely achieve the same thing. So definitely artificers there too. So we've gone pretty long here, but out of these 4 classes, let's maybe get your ranks of likeliness to play, or which one do you think is the best suited for what? So we'll start with you, Will. Which one of these would you more like to play after discussing it?
Probably either a sorcerer or a warlock, but I think sorcerer before a warlock. Yeah, I think if you're gonna multi-class, I think probably a warlock I would choose, but if we're just gonna stick with one, I'd say sorcerer, I think.
Yeah.
As far as like least likely, I'd probably have to say it's a toss-up, honestly, between wizard and artificer for me. But
and why is that? Like wizard just doesn't interest you? Oh my god. Yeah, for the audio listeners, Will's been doing his wild sorcerer flailing throughout the episode.
Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of like the idea of just like having the innate ability to just basically just destroy everything.
Yeah, I want to walk around with a book like a nerd.
Like the ultimate glass cannon kind of thing.
What a nerd.
Although it'd be kind of funny if you're doing like if you're playing a wizard and you're doing like meta gaming where you're just playing yourself in it, maybe the book could be like your phone, and you just have like all your notes and stuff on it. And be like, fuck, I don't know what a spell slot is. Just give me a moment.
Yeah, totally. And I think wizard for me is the one that's the weirdest to explain spell slots. Like with warlock, it's like you can only use that much because that's all your patron allows you. Artificer, it's like you only have so many devices and they need new batteries. Sorcerer is like you're gonna die if you keep pushing yourself. Warlock's like, or sorry, wizard's like, I ran out of pages in my book. It's like, come on, man.
I agree. Like for mechanics, I think wizard has a bit of flaws. Like I think wizard should have more spell slots than at least one more of each level than every other magic caster. I think it's insane.
Interesting. That's you'd get a lot of pushback for that. But I understand.
I would,
but they know so many more spells.
I know, but it's like you can only cast one spell per turn anyway. They have sorcerers that can cast 2 per turn. You have warlocks that can be fighters and have like spells that, you know, wizards have like no unique like thing for them.
Yeah, I feel like wizard gets the most. Like, yeah, give the Eldritch Knight a little bit of wizard, give the Bard a little bit of wizard, you know?
Yeah, they're like the most honestly nerfed. Like they haven't gotten anything, and then like when they do create something new, it's like, oh, let's create a like the Artificer, a brand new class that isn't a wizard. It's like there's no respect. Where's the respect for the wizard?
That's fair, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of game mechanics, though, I would definitely least want to play a warlock because I love casting spells.
Yeah.
I would want after this conversation.
If the warlock had the same amount of spells as everyone else, would that change your opinion?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yes. I don't know much about how many spells a warlock can learn, though. So I think if I were to play of these, I mean, obviously I would always play a wizard, but putting wizard aside, honestly, after our conversation and like I was hating on artificers pretty hard, but thinking about it as like a non-magical person using technology to cast magic, I think that's a really cool angle. So I'd want to play that.
Cool.
And then yeah, sorcerer. I would have always played sorcerer. I just preferred wizard between the two.
Yeah, because you like knowing what. See, that's where I think your opinion on that's interesting because you love casting spells. So and so do I. So my feelings going into sorcerer is like, okay, I have all these things that let me cast more spells.
Yeah.
But you know less spells overall. But which I think is funny to you because like your go-to is always fireballs. It's like always prepared, you know. Yeah, I think you would enjoy playing.
I mean, honestly, the reason I wanted to play wizard is because I thought of wizard like before I started casting fireballs. I was like, they could be like the utilitarian, like the like, you know, cast spells that are useful in other scenarios, like the way I have saved Rhubar's characters' lives multiple times by casting Dimension Door and Misty Step in combination, like that kind of stuff, you know.
That wasn't even Dimension Door; it's like Lightning Step or whatever.
Thunderstep, yeah.
Thunderstep, yeah. That was sick. A character fell off a bridge that led to, you know, an endless abyss.
Yeah. And
Luca teleported to them and then teleported back up. And everyone was like, oh shit. That was super cool. Yeah.
What about you, Matt?
I think, yeah. So Sorcerer, I think, is at the top of my list. It's one of those ones like Fighter, where if someone's like, hey, I'm running this one shot, do you want in? Like, I'll probably opt to those. Like, I think Sorcerer, Bard, and Fighter are like my go-tos. And I think like I'm a sucker for that. It was in me all along, you know, or like, what do I do with this power? I love Sorcerers. Then I'd say my next is probably a Warlock because I also love that dynamic and I like having those like one-on-one interactions, like with you when you were like the giant tree god and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna kill you, and you're like, you know, that was awesome. I love those sort of interactions. And then I think like I don't hate wizards. I would really like to play a wizard one day, but I just find them like the least interesting on this list because they are so like vanilla.
Yeah.
And
in terms of role play, they are the most limited.
And I think like even the subclasses, like some of the new ones are a little bit different, but before that, it was just like you picked a school of magic you were most proficient in. So like, you know, a lot of the sorcerer classes, like mechanically the result of that's the same, but the flavor is so much different,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm a storm sorceress versus a wizard who's very proficient in, abjuration.
Yeah.
Like just the flavor where you can go with that is like totally different to me. So like role play wise, I think I'd be less likely out of all of these to play a wizard, just because I think like the world would have to be so, fleshed out that I'd be like, what would a wizard in this situation be like? Like, yeah. So I don't know. Artificer, I think, could be cool, just like to have gadgets and like, it was really fun for me running for someone who like loved to explain how their gadgets worked.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, oh, cool. That's fucking so sweet. I didn't think of that type of thing. So I think Artificer would be cool for that reason as well. Yeah. But I think you came in hating Artificer, Luca, and you left, a little bit higher up on it. So
I did.
You definitely won't be playing one for our game.
No.
But hopefully, as we start to play more games and stuff, maybe something you take a swing at. But I think that might do it, unless anybody has anything else to add. Seems not.
I think we covered everything.
Yeah, and then some. So yeah, that'll do it for our series on the D&D character classes. It's been a wild ride. I don't know what we're going to do next. We haven't talked about this, but we won't have to for a while. Like I said earlier, next week is our episode where we will be playing a D&D game for the channel for you to enjoy, run by the great Cam Chapman. So look forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. And as always, I'm Matt.
I'm Luca.
I'm Will.
And we are the Lords of Lore.
Nice.